joining us today. First and foremost, is the Development Disabilities Training 101 that I created actually a while back. That was brought forward by Shannon Stott's office, about a month ago, 3-4 weeks ago. So we do highly encourage you to take that training. It's about an hour or so, hour and a half. My intention was to have an introduction to all matters disability and what we're doing on campus, what our intentions are, what we're looking to both create and continue to work on. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, calls for higher education to be responsive to students with disabilities, that there is its own guidance and outlines. Within Canvas, and if I don't explain this right, Rachel will correct me or add to what I'm saying. We have put in a plethora of documents specific to higher education, which goes across all spectrums. So, for instance, there's ticketing for sports events in the theater that are included in there, and seating. Everything that we are responsible for on campus. So it'll go beyond education and students. This series, a 3-part series. This is one of 3, so we do hope you attend 2 and 3. This is the introduction to what our intentions are, as stated. The universal design for learning, which we will just touch on today. Part 2, Rachel will get much more. Part 2 and 3, Rachel will get much more involved and deeper into the concept and how to apply that. So really important for you, again, to try to make 2 and 3. And as stated, it's going to be recorded. So if you can't make 2 and 3, you'll be able to access that. And all that stated, please utilize us with any questions you may have moving forward. We know we're not going to achieve this today. We have a limited number of people on campus that are here today. So our hope is that this will spread across all factions of campus life. But especially in this context, students with disabilities and excess and functional needs, students that need our assistance. And as stated a minute ago, it's mandated by the Americans with Disabilities Act. So what we're doing is not just talking about something we hope you do, it's really something we must do. It's something that is expected of us in, again, higher education. So that said, Rachel, we'll go to the first slide, next page. So this is my website. Real quickly on what I do on campus. I am Soft Money. I have been grant funded since 2010, specific to first and emergency response. We have developed the training for firefighter, EMS, law enforcement, and 911 in New York, South Dakota, Missouri. Those are 2 active grants. Virginia is just law enforcement. Arizona for a mini contract. Other states in tow for emergency management in response to people with disabilities and what we say excess and functional needs. We are in New York, Louisiana, and Nebraska with other states in tow. That is our website for first responder disability awareness training, which will have information beyond first responders. So if you have 5 minutes or so to peruse that, please do. You'll also see within there New York State disability organizations that may be helpful or of interest to you. And again, if you can't find something easy enough, just let me know specific to these topic areas, and we will provide that for you, get you answers for that. Our responsibility is all these first responders across the country, certainly the states that we have grants in or contracts with. So anyone on campus that needs anything, we will be very responsive to your needs. Next slide. Injustice anywhere is I'm going to take my mug off the screen now. You don't need to see me anymore. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of equality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. The disability movement is a social justice movement. It is directly tied into diversity, equity, equality, and inclusion, DEI. The recent trend specific to recognition of injustices across the cultural awareness and diversity demographics or spectrum. We are directly involved in that. The Obama administration recognized people with disabilities as the most discriminated minority in this country. I dare you to poll 25 people at lunch today and ask them the most discriminated minority. You might go 0 for 25 with people recognizing people with disabilities as the most discriminated. It is overlooked in employment. It is overlooked in law enforcement response and police reform. It is overlooked in emergency planning and preparedness. It is overlooked in housing. It is overlooked in transportation. The movement actually started, the activist movement actually started specific to transportation. And if you have not seen the documentary that came out last April, Crip Camp, not my favorite name, but the documentary will highlight the beginnings of the disability movement, started by one woman from, not several people, but one woman, Judy Heumann, from New York State, who I've actually been in the company with a few times. So we're all in this together. We're all affected directly. Anyone want to tell me who said this quote and where I took this picture? Little chat box question there for you. Next slide, please, Ray. And this is our base. This is our definition, if you will. Disability awareness helps to remove barriers so that responsible, self-sufficient people can assume risk, make choices, and contribute as they wish. We all win by this vision because we're all in this together. It's the only minority you can unwillingly join if you live long enough. Welcome to the club. So it's a part of our life. Kelly and Sarah will tell you how many numbers of students on campus that we have, which I was surprised to hear. Not surprised from a ratio, but just didn't know. And then it made me think of all the responsibilities and how many professors and faculty are affected. And are they aware of that? Are they aware of the students that the disabilities? And how do we respond to that? Are they aware how the disability is defined? What comes to play with that personally? The characteristics and indicators. How we approach, how we interact, all that comes to play. That's a part of disability awareness, part of what we do. We will not be breaking down each disability in this context, nor did we in the 101. That may be something we look at to do in another series or another training down the road a little bit. But again, that information is available for you. The barriers we talk about, 3 physical barriers. Not only is a 1-inch lip inappropriate for, say, entrance to a building or structure, it's illegal. 1 inch. Who's aware of that? How are we aware of that? Look at certain cutouts along, even campus, how sometimes the way one sidewalk or one knelt down sidewalk leads to nothing. Those are things that we need to address as part of our ongoing movement. Communication barriers. Millions of Americans do not verbally speak English. They communicate in other languages, the students that we have on campus. 3.5 million Americans use American Sign Language as their primary mode of communication, the 4th most used language in America. English, Spanish, Chinese, and ASL. We're fortunate to have a program on campus. Put some effort forward to learn a little basic ASL. And the third is attitude. I don't say attitude from the standpoint of good attitude or bad attitude. It's not how we approach that. Attitude really from the good side means I'm putting effort forward. I'm making an attempt to understand. Conversely, are we putting that effort forward to understand disability across the spectrum? Disability is not a singular word. It has many subsets. It's a spectrum in and of itself. And each disability has its own characteristics and indicators and how that will present and what those needs may be from an education standpoint. And again, beyond education, what that means for campus life and the ability to be included and a part of everything. If you were not aware, we started and are about 1.5 years in, 2 meetings in, and we've had some very good progress. The Niagara University Accessibility and Disability Matters Committee. I'm chairing that committee. Rachel's on that committee, amongst many others. And our intention is to address all these matters. For instance, our websites, not accessible. A move that we are currently working on now. We're way out of compliance with that. And again, I always reflect back. I don't ever lead with the ADA when I talk in trainings. Disability awareness intentions are to sensitize and educate, but the ADA comes to play, and it's something we want to be conscious of, clearly, because it also can be violations can put you in a bad spot. So these are our intentions, seeing people with disabilities as being self-sufficient and responsible as opposed to dependent. People will may need assistance. I'm the father of 24-year-old twins. They were born 11 weeks premature. From the premature birth, my son has spastic quadriplegia, cerebral palsy, seizure disorder, dysarthria, which is a speech disability, learning disability, low vision. He actually works in our office. He's an Niagara University employee, as an office assistant with us. But he's doing fine. He needs support and assistance, sure. His twin sister is a Cornell University graduate, about to graduate from NYU with her master's in fine arts, has been to Malaysia twice and just took a job in China. There's a big difference with the support and assistance that both of my children need. Well, they still both need support. It comes about in a couple different ways. So we want to understand that people can be active and functional and competent, and they can assume risks. A big piece that we also talk about with children into young adults. Next page. So why do we do disability awareness? Every one of these. This is our a lineup of issues. And I want to be cautious on our agenda. I'll show you our agenda in a minute. Why avoidance? Because we can't avoid, but people do avoid. Can I avoid putting time into a student? Can I avoid that person on the street corner that needed assistance? Do I avoid someone in a grocery store or a setting that someone might need some help or support? Someone else will do that. I don't know what to do. I don't know proper etiquette. I don't know how to interact. But all of these come to play. The number one bullet in here, inclusion. The expectation is inclusion, and to that extent, integration, which kind of they're joined at the hip in disability identification, although not the same. I want to be integrated in program models and sports scenarios, and think of kids in school, and I say kids in school in both K to 12 and higher ed, and wanting to be a part of. Inclusion means I have that opportunity right in front of me. I can go to a ballpark and be a part of that. To partake in that, enjoy that, a theater, a concert, a movie, a place of worship, so on and so forth. And we'll define that in a minute. Next slide, please. This comes from a 13-year-old young lady out of Canada. She says, how do you see me? The glass half empty, disability, can't do, need supports and services, or the glass half full? My competency, my talents, my abilities, what I can provide, my ability to achieve. And I look at this, and this isn't really all of us, right? Just raise your hand if you're perfect. Raise your hand if you don't need supports. Raise your hand if you don't have things that you're not good at. Weaknesses, areas that we're relying on other individuals to learn and understand. We're always learning. There's no such thing as a disability expert. None exist on the planet. It's such a wide array that we will often do. We in the disability world, we connect with our content experts, our subject matter experts, people in the know. Always learning. Reading a book right now, Community Living and Participation for People with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. I worked 17 years as a developmental disability service provider. Still learning it. Still learning deeper pieces. Maybe I know a lot that's in that book, but I'm reading something and learning something new throughout it. So we're always learning. Let's see what people can do. See the talents that they can provide. See their strengths, not their weaknesses. Something we're challenged with the disability community pretty much on a daily basis. Next slide, please. So here's the definition of inclusion I mentioned a minute ago. First of all, note who uses this term. People with disability rights advocates, not the government, not parents, not medical professionals, not educators. The idea that all people should freely, openly, and without pity be accommodate any person with a disability without restrictions or limitations of any kind. The key word in here, accommodate. And that goes into deeper senses that Kelly and Sarah will talk about their roles and responsibilities, what we call reasonable accommodations, reasonable modifications, which slides over to employment. Again, a big part of education. Can be in other scenarios of say, public settings, community settings, municipal settings. Are we accommodating individuals so that they can be so that they have the ability to be learn as much, partake as much as anyone else, the person next to them? And it calls for adjustments. It calls to learn. One of the biggest challenges that I find any educator having is the need to understand what accommodations are and how do I do it. And not just the regulated components of it, which you'll see Kelly and Sarah will get into, but other means of accommodating or assisting them so that they can achieve ultimate success to the best of their abilities. And not without pity. Don't sympathize. Don't look at persons with disabilities in a manner that's for them. One of the number one ways we discriminate against people with disabilities is through pity, is through sympathy. Next page, next slide. The Americans with Disabilities Act. You see the historic signing here. Justin Hart, the gentleman in the cap, was one of the main players, as well as many people with disabilities. But the ADA didn't come about because a whole bunch of white, able-bodied males said, we want to make sure people with disabilities aren't discriminated against. It doesn't work that way. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't have happened if that body of people was the ones that we were relying on. It worked through activism, and it worked through the movements of people like Judy Heumann that I mentioned, and the ADAPT, and the different disability advocacy and activism groups. You really must watch Crip Camp if you haven't seen it. It is riveting. It's phenomenal. It was actually up for one of the awards, documentary awards, or still might be up. I'm not sure if those, not the biggest award follower, but I knew it was up for an award that may or may not have passed yet. But the attempt to movement to deinstitutionalize, which we're still doing today. To advocate, speak for myself, live independently. And the model that comes from this, you see expanded access, inclusion, the rights and protections for people with disabilities. The beauty of our country is that we have this law, which is Germany has a law. I don't know the international laws as well. Canada does not have a universal law. You do it by province. There are many gaps in Canada's response to people with disabilities. But our law is significant. And the intention here was to, again, get to where we're at today. There's holes in it. We had to amend it in 2010. Son of President Bush here, George W., amended and basically fixed some of the flaws that were in the ADA. We have much non-compliance. Many people still don't follow it, don't understand it. Municipalities is a big violator of ADA compliance. We have a program for them, and we work with them, but it's ever going. It's always ongoing. But the movement is going to be forever. And when we talk about these current movements that were again making the headlines, and the intents of what we're doing on campus with the racial equity and the programs that are coming from Simone and Karen and Rolanda and others that are working on this, supported by Father Mar. We cannot overlook the disability rights movement, which often is. How many of you have thought about the disability rights movement all along this social justice and racial equity discussion the last 8-10 months? Be honest. And it needs to be right up there. The largest minority in this country, people with disabilities. The CDC has about 2 years ago came out with the latest stat. 26% of Americans, 1 out of 4. 40 million Americans have some form of anxiety disorder. We could go on and on. The number one disability in this country is walking. 35 million Americans have some form of challenge walking. And we don't just look at it as disability. We define disability as in the context of something that is substantially functioning limiting. So I have colleagues with cerebral palsy that do not get any support from the federal government. Their cerebral palsy in a mild form doesn't put them in any position to have a need. They're college educated. Our assistant our project assistant in first responder disability registering in our office, Dr. Andrew Marco, has cerebral palsy. He's a PhD. He's a professor at CUNY. He runs the self-advocacy program in Buffalo. He's a fellow at the UB's disability history component. So disability has such a wide spectrum, and we've got to be very cautious when you hear someone has a term or diagnosis, has cerebral palsy, has autism. College professors with autism. Temple Grandin, if you haven't heard of Temple Grandin, look her up. Colorado State University. 14 books later, she has autism. So sometimes we hear disability and we think, what can't they do? Go back to my glass half empty. No, we don't define it that way. We don't define it by term or diagnosis. We define it by functional limitations. What may those be? To varying degrees, and sometimes it's minor. This person still has a disability. But got to look beyond that term disability, and that's part of our movement, just the same. Next slide, please. So the ADA, in simple terms, I want the same opportunity as everyone else. I want to be able to fully participate. Go back to my comment on inclusion, some of the examples I gave: ballparks, theater, events, dining, independent living, the independent living movement. If you're not familiar with independent living centers, they're funded by federal and state funding. I was on the New York State Independent Living Council for 6 years. Our local, we have an Engert County IL, Western New York Independent Living, but one based in Engert County over on Packard Road. Their intentions are to provide support and assistance. If we're not sure of something, we're supposed to be calling the Independent Living Center and finding out about adaptive equipment, assistive technology, all the different components that Kelly and Sarah can talk about. And the ability to live on my own, make enough money so I can live independently. I'm self-sufficient. Many challenges. 35% of people with disabilities are employed in this country. 78% want to be. We have a huge gap. The most discriminated minority in this country, specific to employment, disabilities. Who knows that? Let the shameful wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down, said President Bush. Next slide. So the social model of disability, what makes someone disabled is not their medical condition, but the attitudes and structures of society. So how is someone seen? Go back to all my comments about sympathy and inaccessibility and lack of knowledge, non-compliance with the ADA, the civil rights movement specific to disabilities. The ADA is a civil rights legislation. This is actually, Dr. Markham has a phenomenal history on this topic. He's a national expert on disability history, so he speaks to these topics much better than I. We have a training we do for advocates, specific to first responders. He talks about this. So the Smithsonian, the virtual Smithsonian exhibition for disabilities, we recommend you take a look at. And you see here a dated picture, just the same, but no wheelchairs beyond this point. So he's not sure exactly where this comes from, but it's telling of how far we've gone. So I got to stop here with my wheelchair. I can't come any further. Next slide. So this is my slide. This is what I pulled together. What is the agenda? Not this long Christmas Santa Claus list of what the disability community wants. And some of this is more actionable than other. For instance, everyone needs disability awareness training. And we all need it, and we all need to continue it. I still need it. Okay, we're all working on this. We're always learning. What I have highlighted is basically what we are providing on campus, and I could probably have highlighted transportation as well. Accessibility and communications, the core of disability services in Kelly and Sarah's discussion. School and transition. So we are transitioning from the course I teach for education, for special education, graduate students, family life to independent living, transitioning to adult life. And I mean, what's our objective? We have students walk out well educated and in a position to get a good job, transition into adult life, right? It's one of our responsibilities, not just a diploma. But to that extent, employment. And employment can always be highlighted because we also on campus employ people. So while we're looking at this from a couple different angles, employment probably should be highlighted in everyone I talk to. Spirituality, being of Ascension Catholic University, how we provide that. So for now, we have a ramp in the chapel. So if people want to go to the chapel behind the small chapel, am I saying that right? I actually go there, and we have a ramp. Kristen got a ramp. We talked about that. She's supposed to say, I can't wait for some hard structure to go up. But we need to know about that. People advocating on their own. Recreation and leisure. What's it all about? It's Friday. Time to recreate, right? And then person first language. Seeing the person first language, recognizing the person beyond the disability. Looking beyond the wheelchair, as we like to say. Beyond the white cane. Next slide, please. So this is a couple of these pages are from the DAT 101 that if you attended, I know you're getting some repeats. The intention is that you secure in the context of our UDL series. And these are just the components of what we're addressing across campus. All of these are significant, specific to accessibility and accommodations in all aspects, and certainly beyond campus. This is a slide that I show to municipalities and other public entities, healthcare professionals, but all of these are a part of how we achieve that. Proper signage, accessible into family restrooms, just simply parking. Where's the entrance? Doors and getting in, accessible buildings. Communication, having the sign language interpreters. During the pandemic, you've seen a lot of sign language interpreters. Cuomo was the last governor in this country to have a sign language interpreter. And I was quietly part of the movement with the disability rights attorneys and deaf access services that filed the lawsuit. I was advising on that with those folks. We were all in this together. But you just have to make the move. We don't need to wait. We need to think about this all the time. Do you have what is large print? 14 fonts. Everything should be in 14 font. We just one of our newest our higher program coordinator is someone who's blind. My emails need to be in response to him need to be in large print because he has some residual vision. Service animals, events, and then obviously accommodations for students. Next slide, please. Because what do people with disabilities say about quality of life? You're looking at it here. So just digest this for a minute. Really what we're talking about is quality of life. When people say to me, how do you do disability awareness training? It's about quality of life. So some of these we all strive for, right? Physical, material well-being, emotional well-being, developing ourselves personally. We're probably always doing that. You're reading a book right now. You're developing yourself personally. Look at the last four. Especially here as a white, able-bodied male to speak to this. I don't wake up thinking about my rights every day. I think about other people's rights. But while I'm the majority, I become the minority, deservingly so. Determine for myself what's best for me. Does my son tell me what he wants for lunch, or do I tell him what he's going to have for lunch? Did I put on his shirt today, or did I ask him what shirt he wanted to wear? It gets down as simple as that. Socially included, and then interpersonal relationships. Who am I interacting with? Who do I have the ability to interact with? Am I just interacting with and having relationships with other people with disabilities? Are we accepting of? Understanding proper etiquette, being comfortable to have interpersonal relations with other people. So this is our objective, quality of life. Next slide. And then to just close my sections out here, the dignity of risk. A big part of this is understanding what the dignity of risk is. I'll go back to my twins. I'm a perfect case for a lot of this discussion. My daughter's taken a lot of risks. She was also a outdoor education, what they call Odyssey at Cornell, where she was camping out in the Adirondacks in the Smoky Mountains with 7, 8 students responsible for them at the tail end. That's risky. My son doesn't do that. The longest he's been on his own was when me and my wife take the car to the mechanic for 10 minutes and come back home. That's about it. But we understand that. We have to be conscious of risk. But the intent here is to recognize that there will be risks, and especially with all students. That's America's youth and adolescents, young adults. There's risk factors that take, and some of them not always wise. But that this is our objective, is recognizing people will take risk, and we need to be a part of that. We need to support that. Obviously, it needs to be safe. And this is something we don't think about outside the concept of people without disabilities, the able-bodied, the typical the general population, the different terms we use. Next slide, please. And then just to again wrap this up, the dignity of risk it actually goes back to 1972 when I started in the field of development disabilities. It was well in year 1986. So I started in the field. But these are our objectives: disability awareness, inclusion, self-advocacy, supported decision-making, and person-centered planning. Okay, so we've talked about disability awareness and inclusion, person's ability to advocate on their own, speak for themselves, say what's best for them. I might need supports in some decision-making, as I think all young adults do. Sometimes we still need supports in some of the decisions we make, right? A lot of times we don't make decisions independent of ourselves. Talk to someone about that. What do you think I should do here? And then planning specific to that person, which is a big part of what an individual education plan is, the IEP, and then what, again, Kelly and Sarah will talk about. And there's a lot more on this. I'm giving you the 1-minute version of it. There's certainly more that goes with this. And if you have questions on this, you want more, just let us know. Next slide. I will pass the buck over to Kelly and Sarah, and I will stifle.
Great. Thank you, Dave. So now we're going to switch gears and we're really going to focus on accessibility services and really what our office does and how we can support students and faculty. So we do have a link to our website there. We do have a lot of information available. And so our focus is on students with disabilities. Just a reminder for employees that need accommodations or have disabilities, all of those requests go through human resources. So our focus is going to be on students, and our office really works with a wide variety of students. And we're going to share some numbers and types of students registered later. So we can go to the next slide, Rachel. All right, so I'm Kelly Engert. I'm the coordinator of accessibility services. Sarah Mecca, you're going to hear from in a few minutes. She's the advisor in our office. So what both of us really do is meet with students. So we provide information about our office, how students can get registered with us. And we also review documentation, and then we are in charge of approving accommodations for students. And then we also have 2 graduate assistants in our office, Kylie Stover and Nick Waskow. So really their responsibilities are helping to carry out accommodations. And you're going to hear more about those accommodations later, but it's things like testing, note-taking, and alternate format of textbooks. And if we can go to the next slide. So really in our office, what we do is we work with students, and we're really committed to creating equal access for all Niagara University students with disabilities. And our mission is to provide accommodations and support to students with disabilities that register and document with our office so that they can fully participate in all of the programs and services that Niagara offers. So Dave touched on these a little bit before, but the relevant laws are Section 504 of the Rehab Act and then the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the definition of disability, a qualified person with a disability, is any person who has a physical or mental impairment, has a record of such impairment, or is regarded as having such an impairment, which substantially limits one or more major life activities. So examples of those major life activities can be things like walking, standing, speaking, concentrating, reading, learning, and those types of things. So examples of disabilities would be things like learning disabilities, visual impairments, hearing loss, psychological disorders, mobility impairments, and other chronic illnesses. The other thing to know is that the education of individuals with disabilities has been regarded as a civil rights issue. And both the Section 504 of the Rehab Act and the ADA specifically state that no otherwise qualified person with a disability shall solely by reason of disability be excluded from participation in or be denied the benefits or be subjected to discrimination by any institution which is subject to these laws. And so in addition to the legal requirement, we also feel like it's really part of the Vincentian mission as well. And just to note, some of our students that we work with, Sarah's going to provide information on how they register. Many of them had accommodations in high school. So if you hear terms like a 504 plan or an IEP, those are K-12 terms. But we have students that will have a history of having previous accommodations, but then we'll also have students that will be newly diagnosed and request accommodations. So Sarah's going to give information next on how that process works here at Niagara. Next slide.
All right, hi everyone. So to request accommodations at Niagara University, it's the student's responsibility to disclose their diagnosis with accessibility services. The student must provide accessibility services with documentation from a qualified professional that clearly states their disability and their functional limitations. Students are then asked to contact either Kelly or myself to make that initial appointment. So that way we can go through the documentation and discuss what accommodations may be needed. And this is done on a case-by-case or course-by-course basis. I just want to put this out there that to be fair to all students who request accommodations, it's recommended that you do not, as professors, provide accommodations without first having the students contact accessibility services. Next slide, please. So for numbers, during the 2019-2020 academic school year, there were approximately 320 students registered with accessibility services, and that number has only continued to grow. Of those registered, some of the most common disabilities are learning disabilities, including ADD and ADHD, medical conditions such as migraines, seizure disorders, and mobility impairments, and as well as mental health diagnoses, including anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Next slide, please. So once a student is registered with accessibility services, they are asked to participate in what's called the interactive process. This is what students will come in during that first meeting, and we'll talk through their current substantial limitations to determine the need for accommodation. Then, with the student's permission, we will reach out to each student's professors, letting them know of the student's accommodations for this semester by emailing out our course accommodation approval form. It's then up to each student to determine how much or how little they utilize their accommodations. Next slide, please.
All right, so this is an actual example of our course accommodation approval form. So we used to complete paper forms with students, and then it would be up to them to distribute them to their professors. But last year we did switch to emailed forms due to the pandemic. And we think we're going to stick with the emailed forms from this point forward because we think it made it easier for everyone. So how this works is, Sarah talked about the interactive process. We meet with the student to really discuss and determine what accommodations they need. And obviously it's all based on their documentation as well. But what we really do is go through this form in detail with students. So we explain really how the entire process works. So just to give a background on it, at the top of the form is just the record management policy. That's just instructing professors to shred their copy of the form at the end of the semester. They're not supposed to keep it forever. It makes it easier now that we send emails. You may not even have a paper copy. But we put the student's name, ID number on there, and then their class schedule. And the student can pick if they want all their classes on there, or if they can pick and choose certain ones. We typically recommend they put all their classes just in case. But it says that the student has provided documentation to us, and that the accommodations have been approved based on documentation from that qualified professional. And you'll notice that nowhere on here does it share specific details as far as why a student is registered. And we tell students that if they're comfortable, they can certainly share that information. But the following conditions apply. So one, accommodations are only valid for the course and semester indicated. So every semester a student wants to use accommodations, they have to fill this out with Sarah or myself. Typically, once they provide documentation, they don't have to keep resubmitting documentation. We keep it on file as long as none of their requests change or their condition changes. But number two, it's the student's responsibility to discuss accommodations with faculty and then really use their accommodations as they need. But if they don't have a conversation with professors, it could result in a delay in the student getting accommodation. And then three, requests for accommodations are not retroactive, and then all information on the form is confidential. And then you can kind of see a laundry list of potential academic accommodations. And we'll go into detail on some of these in a few minutes, but it's things like being able to record lectures, use of a note taker, interpreter services, course materials being provided in an alternate format, and then testing accommodations, extended time, quiet location, questions read using a computer. And then we have the other accommodations listed on there as well. The other thing to note is that when a student fills this out, we also go through our test accommodation procedures. So that really explains in great detail what the student's responsibilities are and what they need to do. And so we do ask them before every test is scheduled to talk with us so they can get added to our schedule. We asked for 48 hours notice this year to make sure we have space for students because of social distancing, and then also make sure we actually have the test. And then we also ask students to talk with professors before every single exam, quiz, whatever that might be. But we can go to the next slide. We're going to talk more about those academic accommodations. Testing accommodations have historically been the most utilized accommodations. So Sarah's going to provide more detail on the testing accommodations in a few minutes, but the most typical ones are extended time and then separate location. So we do have the whole testing space in the back of our office. The note taker accommodation, so that's for a student that has difficulty getting down the notes in class. So how this works is We ask students to attend class first to really get a sense of their note-taking needs. As professors, you may provide very detailed PowerPoints and they may not need additional assistance, but when they do, we hire another student that's registered in the exact same class to share a copy of their notes. And as a thank you, we do provide a gift card at the end of the semester, but typically the student knows who their note taker is, the note taker knows who the student is, so then the notes can be emailed directly to them. And we found that that has worked well. Our office can also provide alternative format of textbooks. So this is for students that might have disabilities that impact reading. So say dyslexia or visual impairment, they still have to purchase a hard copy of the book, but then we can go to the publishers to ask for a Word or a PDF file of the book. And if it's not available, we'll ask for permission to scan it and create our own alternate format. So then how this works is the students provided with that electronic file, and then they'll have assistive technology on their computer that will actually read the textbooks to them. There's a lot of ebooks out there now too that actually come with this feature built in, which is super helpful. We also have assistive technology in our office, so screen reading software that can do this as well. Attendance is the next accommodation on there, which is a very different accommodation. We obviously don't say that students just don't have to go to class, but when they provide documentation of a disability or condition that's more episodic in nature, like a medical condition or a mental health condition, we ideally, if the student will make the request early, will go to faculty at the beginning of the semester to really have a conversation, to really find out whether or not you can be flexible with attendance requirements, based on the essential requirements of your course. We've also found this past year, given the pandemic, that professors are definitely more lenient with their attendance policies. And then the last accommodation on there is time extensions on assignments. So we obviously, it's not going to do a student any favors to have more time for everything. So what we ask them to do is really request negotiate this as they need it. And when it's possible, they can really have more time. So we ask the student to send an email and then copy Sarah or myself on the email so we can help really determine what a reasonable time extension might be. And these are the common academic accommodations. Our office does also approve non-academic accommodations. So that's things like disability housing requests, emotional support animals. But our focus for today is on those academic ones. So Sarah's going to talk more about those testing accommodations. So if we can go to the next slide, please.
Okay, so for extended time with testing, students are expected to test during their typical class time and in the same format as the rest of the class. If a student does need to take their exam at a different time, they will need to get approval from their professors to do so. So there are some situations where this may happen, where a student may need to start early or adjust their start time. For example, this could be when a student has a back-to-back class schedule and they would need to adjust their start time to allow them access to their extended time. But then also to accommodate for evening exams and the testing center capacity. Students testing in the online environment are entitled to accommodation for any online assessment. One on the email that we provided to you with the accommodation form, you will find how much extended time a student should receive. So the next slide lists standard class times and appropriate time extensions, but just please keep in mind that your allotted assessment time may be different, so you may need to adjust. Next slide, please. Okay, so you will see here that we have calculated extended time for both 55 and 80-minute exams for time and a half as well as double time. So for example, if you have a student with time and a half as an accommodation, you would then take that 55-minute class, extend their time by 28 minutes, giving them a total of 83 minutes to complete the exam. I would just like to note that if you provide more time than you think students will need to complete the online assessment, you will still need to extend the time for the student with the disability. So for example, if you provide the class 1 hour to complete the assessment and think all students can complete it in 30 minutes, you will still need to provide the student with extended time. Next slide, please.
Right, so we're not going to go into great detail on this, but what we want you to know is that Canvas actually has this fancy built-in accessibility checker. So if you look for that icon with the person in that square, you can actually click on it and it will tell you how accessible the content of your course is. So it'll look in things like your assignments, quiz questions, discussion posts, how it's all set up, and tell you whether or not it's accessible, and then tell you what you might need to change. So it'll look for things like heading structure, table makeup. We also have a more comprehensive guide on this that we're going to send some follow-up resources for you. So we're going to provide more information on how to use this. There's also a bunch of information on the Canvas website explaining how this works as well. And then if we can go to the next slide, this just shows how you can also provide alternative text for images. So in your Canvas course, if you have pictures, it's always a good and accessible idea to provide alternate text. So really just a description of what that picture is. So that way, if the student's using a screen reader, it'll be read to them. And then if the image too is just a decorative image and really doesn't have anything to do with the content of your course, you can just put that as a decorative image. And later on in the training series, Rachel's definitely going to give more information on universal design and how to set up your Canvas course to make it as accessible as possible. Next slide.
When working with students, accessibility services can definitely be used as a resource for faculty. If you have a student who's struggling in class, please contact us. We do offer progress conferencing for students with disabilities. So this is a weekly meeting with either Kelly or myself, where we discuss academic progress, time management, and different study skills. We have also created several other resources that can be made available, including closed captioning resources and working with students on the autism spectrum. If you have any suggestions on a resource that may be needed, please let us know. Next slide, please. All right, so here we have a list of things that we hear most often. Students do have the ability to register for their accommodations at any point in the semester. While we do request our students meet with us the first 2 weeks of the school year or the semester, that doesn't always happen. So they can register at any point in the semester. They can also choose how frequently or how often they would like to use their accommodations. So for example, with testing, we have some students that we see all of the time, and then we have other students who we only see really at midterms and finals. So it's really up to the student on when they want to utilize those accommodations. As we meet with students at the beginning of the semester, we do remind them that they should reach out to their professors before every test or quiz, just to make sure that they are utilizing their extended time, right? So this is for both in-person and online assessments. They should reach out to their professors for in-person exams, just scheduling an appointment to come to the ASC. So that way we know we have a spot for them, and then the professors know when the student is coming to test. Again, please keep in mind that students may need to adjust their start times due to their schedule or the ASC hours. Accommodations are not retroactive. So a student cannot ask to retake a test that they had taken prior to setting up their accommodations. And then is maybe beneficial for professor to know a little bit more information about their student that they're working with. So with the student's permission, we can disclose the student's diagnosis. And then I also just wanted to point out that we do not do any disability testing within our office. It's more providing the accommodations and meeting with the students. Next slide, please. So Accessibility Services is located within the Academic Success Center in the first floor of Seton Hall. Nested within the Academic Success Center is peer tutoring for most 100 and 200 level courses, the Writing Center, and academic coaching, which is where students meet with a staff member about once a week to discuss academic progress, study skills, and time management. If you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to reach out. Next slide.
And just to reiterate what Sarah said, we really do hope to be a resource for both professors and students. So if you have a student that's struggling that's not registered with us, you can also make a general academic support referral, because we can kind of go over everything that's available and see whether or not maybe they would qualify for accommodations, or maybe they just need a tutor or writing center support or something like that. But we're really excited about this training and the future sessions that we are doing, and to partner with all of these offices. But now we want to open it up for questions. So you can ask questions live, you can put them in the chat. But we thank you for attending today.
I actually have a couple questions. So for Kelly and Sarah specifically, so a student with, because I often get students that come to me and say they have test taking anxiety. And so I just tell them that if they go and get a doctor's note, because most of them are on, some sort of anti-anxiety medication, they also have to have the doctor document that they have restriction, or that they need, they have some sort of restriction or something. Like, is that also the case?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So what we tell students for documentation is that not only do we need their diagnosis, but also how they're impacted.
Okay.
So sometimes we'll get letters that literally will be one sentence to say, this student has anxiety, which isn't as helpful as providing more details. We have a disability verification form too that doctors can fill out, which oftentimes if they fill that out would give us all the information we need.
Okay, so I should have them go to you first for the documentation paperwork, and then go to their doctor.
Yes, that probably is the easiest thing to do. That way we can just explain, the full amount we need. Sometimes too, we can temporarily approve accommodations while they're working through the process if we at least have some preliminary information.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, because I know like the more steps that they have to go through, the less likely they are to complete them. So I want to make sure that minimal number of steps.
Yep.
And then for accessibility, in terms of like, I use McGraw-Hill, are there specific questions that I should be asking in terms of how because I use like the integrative, e-textbook, as well as the software and stuff that goes along with them, that ask them questions. What kind of questions can I ask them about the accessibility, and like, what should I be looking for? Like, what are some things that good companies offer that others don't in terms of accessibility through the online sort of like textbooks?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think that there's something that companies have to fill out. Sarah, I don't know if you know about this. I can't remember what it's called.
VPAT.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, VPAT. So companies have to fill it out just to kind of show that they are accessible.
Okay. And is it like all standard, or are there some companies that do a better job and other ones that don't?
I think there's definitely some that go above and beyond. Our experience with a lot of those publisher textbook things, like I know we had I think it was an intro to biology textbook last year that was electronic and it read. So it was super helpful because we didn't have to do anything for our student to have that book read to them. So it seems like a lot of them do have a lot of nice more accessible features built in.
Okay.
Most of the time, students just don't know it's there, which is the kind of difficult part. But once they find it, it's usually just right in the textbook, in the e-textbook.
Yeah, I have several students that have had concussions, and so they really struggle now with like reading the ebook and stuff. So I'm trying to figure out what's do they just need the reader to read the textbook to them, so it's audio, or is there something else that I should be looking for as well in terms of the textbook?
The audio should work, because then in theory, they could turn off their computer screen and just listen to it then. But that tends to be the easiest way to do it.
And then one last question. I'm sorry, I'm overwhelming everybody with questions. Is the timeline for accessibility in terms of extended time? When I do the online exams, because I administer it through Canvas, a lot of times, just for simplicity's sake, the class is an 80-minute class, but I'll put an hour and 80 minutes as the time duration for everybody, because it's just a lot more work to like go through. Is that still considered within compliance? The expectation is they should be finishing their exam within the 80 minutes. And so that way I don't have to pull out each student that needs accommodations and give them extra time.
That is a good question. You can tell on Canvas how long students are taking then, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So if you had a student that had regular time that, took 2 hours or whatever, would you let them do that or no?
I would be concerned if they did. So my
Okay.
students take the exam within 80 minutes. Some of them take, an extra 10 or 15 minutes, but generally speaking, they don't. Like that's like after class time or whatever. It's designed to be taken within 60 minutes. But yeah.
So Sarah, I'm not sure what you're thinking, but if you're giving everyone that more time, then the students with disabilities probably should get the extended time.
Okay. So I'll have to go back in and just for the students that get extended time. My idea was the students with extended time get, what is it? An hour and 60 minutes if it's 80 minutes, like even if they get twice. Yeah. If they get twice the time, if I give them an hour and 80 minutes, that's even more than but I can go through.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm in compliance.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. You may want to consider shortening the time too for all students, but that's up to you.
Okay. I think those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
I wanted to mention that what I've done in my class in the same situation in Virginia is I just tell the students who need extra time, just email me their exam. So everyone gets the usual time, and then I say, email me by this time. And it's always worked in the past. I just as soon do that last Friday, and they were like very thankful they got their exam in on time. So that's just another option. Say, reach out to those students who have accommodation, say, just please email me your exam by in this stated time. But I don't know if that works as well for your exams.
I was going to say, these are multiple choice ones. And so they go into the Canvas format and take the exam on Canvas using multiple choice. And so it ends up being that I have to set like timelines for how long it is for each student. So it's really easy for me to set a timeline for everybody. But then if I want to do extended time for each student, I do extended time. I have to go back in and add that extended time. So it's fine. It's just, I figured it would just be easier to just do everybody. But yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mine just like, they're just writing. So I guess it's different when just a writing. Yeah. So, okay.
If nobody else has any questions, I do have one more question about who do we contact with, we're thinking about getting a new building for the Science Center, and it seems like Golisano is only from 2015, but some of the rooms really don't seem as accessible as they could be. And I'm just wondering if when they're coming up with the design of the building, how they're keeping accessibility in mind and whether or not they could be doing a better job or whether or not we can in some way sort of direct it. So is there somebody sort of in charge of that process?
Yes, Dan McMahon, I think his title is facility planner, but he knows all about the ADA requirements. So he is an expert on that and keeps all of those accessibility things in mind. And if you have questions, you could certainly ask them too.
I mean, it's in compliance, but it is like, for example, our main lecture room is, has like a tiered setup and restricted chairs. And so down at the bottom, there's free moving chairs and there's two sort of free moving tables. So somebody, for example, in a wheelchair or whatever could get in there, but it also means that the students are sort of stuck down in the front of the classroom and, sort of limited. So it is compliant, but it's not sort of the best design. So I didn't know if there's some way we could sort of like encourage a bit more of a different sort of design in terms of accessibility. I don't know.
I know that if I could just jump in for a second, Golisano had some other issues too, like just as far as science, like, drawers don't hold beakers and things like that. So this had been raised to Dan McMahon before about including ADA requirements and actually just science requirements. And so I do know he's looking for like a science-based engineering firm with the ADA involved. So I know he's aware of it, but the committee that Dave, where are you? Chairs, there he is. Well, definitely we can bring this back to our whole planning committee too.
Yeah, Virginia, that's exactly some of the points we're looking at with accessibility. So I'm glad you brought that up. And that part when we take the next step, which is going to be a whole sweep of the campus for specific to accessibility, we'll be looking at that. So I made a note of what you said, and I'll come together with this. So you have let Dan know. You're going to let Dan know.
I have not. I don't know if Dr. Rossi.
Okay.
I will.
Okay. Yeah, we'll address that for you. If we have any questions, we'll come back to you. But I'm glad you brought that up.
It is compliant. It's just not as accessible as it possibly could be if you specifically designed with the idea of making it as inclusive as possible, is all.
ADA compliance is not always, that's the base standard.
Yeah.
What we want to look for is full accessibility and accommodation. So the ADA is wonderful. It's great. It's got guidance. It tells everyone what to do and how to do it. But sometimes we need to look beyond that in many different circles. So for instance, space in a restaurant between tables, there's 36 inches. Well, we say that's 3 feet. That's still a tight squeeze. We tell people to go a little bigger. And there's a whole bunch of different ways we approach it. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Are there any more questions for Kelly, Sarah, or Dave? If not, I am going to just remind everybody that we have 2 more sessions on this, which are going to get into the universal design for learning specifically with college teaching and learning and college teaching and learning in Canvas, now that we are using it more and more. So these are our next upcoming sessions. We can hope you will join us. Checking the chat just to make sure. All right. I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Thank you for joining us.